Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Hello, you're listening to the podcast, So There I Was. It's how all great aviation tales begin, and boy, do we have some great aviation tales this week. Flying to extremes.
Yes.
Extremes is an insufficient word.
It's a perfect title. I'm speechless. Rarely in this interview, I was speechless. A lot.
How and why this man is even alive is mind-boggling. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Hey, sponsors this week, Fig, are two of them. HelloFresh. Thank you very much for coming back and continuing to support these amazing stories coming out to people. HelloFresh.com/free. So there I was for a free breakfast item for the length of your subscription. And man, that's good stuff. I love me some HelloFresh.
And I do too, because it's quick and easy.
Not just quick and easy, it's great food. I mean, these are some amazing recipes.
Yeah, it's not nasty like TV dinners. It's actually really good food.
They've got a talented group of people putting that stuff together over there. So thank you to HelloFresh. Also, another talented group of people supporting us this week is Flight Training International, FTIratings.com.
FTIratings.com.
If you like the smell of avgas and sweat socks, don't call FTIratings.com.
That's right. If you don't want to, risk your life in a baling wire held together smells like, 100 low lead and sweat socks, then Flight Training International is the way you want to go, my friends.
Right. They're a professional group over there, and they're going to take care of the veterans. And if you mention this show, you get $100 off. We'll talk more about that during the show. Let's talk about this show. I got nothing to say except, oh my God.
It's hard. I know. I'm still processing what I just heard. He has an amazing life story.
Yes.
And I don't want to ruin it, but how he got his aviation interest was really interesting as well.
Yeah.
I mean,
We'll say this. He was born at the beginning of World War II in France.
Yeah.
And his interest grew from there.
He got to stand in his yard and watch aerial dogfights over his head.
Yeah.
That's how he got his aviation interest. I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
But his flying
and then he wanted to be a lumberjack.
Yeah. Well.
No one was hiring, so he had to go fly airplanes instead.
Yeah. Unbelievable. At 3, 4, or 5 cents a mile.
A mile.
That's how they were paid.
Only if you got the mission done. If you had to turn back.
If you went and you couldn't complete the mission and came back, no pay.
No money for you. Yeah, no soup for you.
That's rough. And of course, I don't want to ruin it anymore. I mean, because it was a one-man show. It really was. And holy cow.
It was indeed. And he wrote the book Flying to Extremes.
Great book.
It is a fun book. And we go over many of the stories that are in the book. But he shouldn't be here. No two ways about it. He's done stuff in airplanes you and I wouldn't consider on our most desperate days.
No.
And his ability to survive some of those situations is almost superhuman. That's the best way I can put it.
I think that was a perfect explanation.
Yeah. So why don't you listen to some of these stories and see if you don't agree? Let's get out of the way, and no ejection seat handles, no collectives, but don't forget your survival kit.
This here is a true story.
Or the sponson.
About crossing the pond.
Bingo.
At night, in the world's smallest cockpit, on the tanker, through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond.
And there I was in thick clouds at 10,000 feet along the Canadian Arctic coast, losing altitude at 500 feet per minute, in spite of having full power and takeoff flaps. The single otter was covered with half an inch of ice, and I had 10 American fishermen on board, but we were still hours away from Great Bear Lake, falling off the sky, and I knew we would never make it. At this rate of descent, we would hit the tundra in about 15 minutes in thick fog and at cruising speed. All my maydays were wasted, useless, because the long HF antenna, which I had unfurled and was trailing some 30 feet or 50 feet behind us, was covered with thick ice. So I turned back and looked at my passengers in the cabin. They were all reading and sleeping peacefully, and I felt sorry for them.
Yet. Hello, you are listening to the podcast. So there I was, and that is a terrifying "so there I was" opener. This is Fig. Where's my co-host? I'm in Kearney today, my friend.
Hey, good afternoon. Welcome home from your trip, Fig. Repeat here. I'm in New Hampshire, and that is none other than our guest this week, the author of Flying to Extremes. And I think extreme is probably an inadequate word for the type of flying that this man did over his career. It's a fascinating book, and I'm eager for you to go get it and hear it or read it. We're about to hear some of what's in that book. So I want to say bienvenue, Dominique Prinet, and bonjour, welcome to our show. So there I was. Wow, what a tale. And we're going to circle back to that later. But here's the other fascinating part of the book. It opens in World War II France, which is where you were born. So if you could tell us about your childhood and how you became interested in flying.
I was born right at the beginning of the war, so I remember the Germans in Paris, the German occupation, and the anxiety that it caused to the civilians, and also the fighting when the front went through our family castle in the east of France where we were hiding. The fighting took place in the castle for 3 days and 3 nights, and I was 5 years old at the time, so I remember it vividly. And as you mentioned, about 18 years later, I was flying, and then I flew some of those German airplanes which were left behind when the German moved back to where they had come from. And so we were using, well, here's one of them, yes, the Fizzler Storch. It's a very short takeoff and landing German reconnaissance airplane with humongous flaps from one end to the other and slats in front of the wing. And it carries a pilot and an observer. And this is the airplane, Place de la Concorde, right downtown in Paris, with German soldiers around it. And that's the airplane which was used by the Germans to recover Mussolini from a farm, a yard, when he was surrounded by the Americans in Italy and he needed to be saved and picked up. So they used that airplane to pick him up. So it's quite a machine.
The next best thing before the helicopter.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, I think
the small tires. I mean, normally Tundra, of course, they're probably operating that thing off roads and anyway, right?
Yeah, they probably had also bigger tires for it, I don't know, but they had skis. I flew this thing to tow gliders on wheels and on skis.
Wow. What kind of engine is in that, Dominique?
I don't remember.
Okay.
It worked well.
So here's the cool thing for those of you watching, and you may remember Catherine Kaiser, Halfway Around the World in 40 Days. When I first met her in February, she took me to a hangar in south of Cologne, and there is one of the two that are still flying in the world today.
Yeah. Holy shit, that's it.
So that's it. That's kind of cool. So, oh my gosh. Well, I think Mussolini probably would have rather been captured by the Americans than the way he did meet his end, but
Probably, yes.
So let's go back to the aviation beginning. How was it that you got interested in aviation? Was it the
when I was a kid in around 1945, 44 and 45, I was watching the fighting in the air, in the sky over Paris and over the east of France. When the front went through Paris, my family moved to our country castle, our little family castle on the east. So then eventually the front caught up with us, and so there were more dogfights over our heads. So I got quite fascinated and started flying gliders as soon as I could. At around 15, I think I was a glider pilot at 16 and an airplane pilot at 17. And I've been loving aviation ever since.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah. That's well, just seeing that and remembering that as a young child. And then, I get it. I totally get it.
Right. Getting to see that. That's fascinating. All right.
I remember.
So you got your licenses while in France still, right? Before you emigrated to Canada.
Yeah, I had a glider's pilot license and then a private pilot, and I took my commercial license and instructor's license, and I worked as a flying instructor when I was at university and at college to earn some living over the weekends.
Nice. Good way to work your way through college, I guess. A lot of kids still doing that today. So, yeah, very nice. So, well, how is it you decided to emigrate to Canada and find yourself where you were flying two extremes?
Yeah, I was coming from a very old traditional family going back 500 years on my mother's side. And those people are very smart and very bright and have high positions. And I didn't feel up to standards, so I felt terribly frustrated and miserable and shamed. So I just packed up and went to become a logger. Just forget the family principles and hide in the forest in Western Canada, as far as from home as I could go, and just disappear as a logger chopping trees with an axe. That was my dream. And then I couldn't find a job as a logger, so I had $200 in my pocket, and that's not enough to buy a ticket to get back home. So I had to find a job. The only thing I could do besides cutting trees with an axe is flying airplanes. So I found somebody who loaned me some money to get the Canadian equivalent of my French licenses, commercial and instructor, which I got very rapidly. And I immediately found a job and started flying up and down the coast. And I was fascinated by the beauty of the country, the openness of the people. You could do whatever you wanted and fly and land. You could land on water. You could land on logging roads. You can land on highways. You could carry stuff outside the airplane. I couldn't believe it. And as long as you didn't hurt anybody and didn't bother anybody, that was fine. As long as it's not strictly illegal, then you can do it. In France, in the country, you want to go to the washroom, you have to ask for government approval. I mean, you can't do anything without government approval. Well, here...
Sounds like marine aviation, right, Fig? Sounds say you can't do it.
That's right. It's the wild, wild west of aviation is what you walked into.
And
there were, right?
In 1965, you could really do whatever you wanted. You could even fly at night. I had a night license and an IFR, but you could fly at night and in bad weather with airplanes which shouldn't be doing it and land on runways which had no light, as long as they didn't break anything. That was the key point. Don't hurt anybody, don't break anything, and nobody will bother you. So you've got to be discreet about it.
Right. I'm actually looking through one of the photos you sent us, and I'm not seeing it now because it's too small on my screen. But one of the photos you sent me was an airplane with looked like two rowboats attached to the floats. Let's see if no, that's not it. But
no, that's not it. Yeah, there is. That was later on Great Bear Lake in July.
Okay.
The Great Bear Lake was frozen solid still in July, and there's a fishing lodge at the northeast corner of Great Bear Lake, which receives American fishermen during the months of July up to the 15th of August. When it closes, it gets too cold. And the American tourists were coming in, but the lake was frozen except a few distant patches along the shoreline. So I had to carry some boats, about half a dozen boats. They're outboard motor, big aluminum boats. And so with the otter on the floats, I took off, and I thought I would fly with two boats, and it wasn't a good idea. But that's the one. There's a boat.
Oh, jeez.
So,
Oh my God.
perfectly aerodynamically safe.
yeah, I had takeoff bar and takeoff flaps, and I was just cruising along. That's as high as I could get, maybe 1,000 feet above the ground or so. Wouldn't climb any higher, and flying very, very slowly. But eventually we made it. So I did half a dozen trips like this to carry all the boats to various places for the fishermen who arrived a few days later.
Oh my gosh!
That-
So that
incredible,
just
isn't
triggered so you triggered a question for me, Dominique. The one of the chapters you were. I don't remember which chapter it is, but one of your passengers. He had a lot of equipment that you had to get to a certain spot, and it sounded like I don't know what kind of a plane you were flying, because I was envisioning like a beaver. That was a beaver. The picture with the boats on the sides.
An
Right?
otter. That was an
Oh,
otter.
it was an otter. It sounded like it needed to be a roll-on, roll-off cargo type plane, but I doubt that was the case. I don't remember what equipment that.
It was, most of my flying was carried in the bush was with otters, and we carried loads, some pretty extraordinary loads of drilling pipes. So you've got a ton of drilling pipes in there.
I remember one of the descriptions you had was of trying to load a snowmobile transverse across, and then decided that wasn't going to work.
Yeah, well, I asked the passengers to put that was on a Beaver, a smaller airplane. I asked the passengers to put their load in, and they had a skidoo. And when I came back, because I was preparing some kind of a flight notification, so you call by radio, announce to the world you're going to do some flying. And so when I came back, I could see the Beaver was on the ground, loaded with the two doors open at 90 degrees, and a skidoo set up in the Beaver, but right across. So the piece of the skidoo was sticking out on one side, a piece of the skidoo was sticking out, and then the doors were in front of it, open at 90 degrees, like gigantic air brakes.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and shook my head and said, "Look, this thing ain't gonna fly."
Sounds like exactly like that, like the speed brakes on an A4. Two big old boards sticking out sideways.
Yeah. So, and then I discovered just recently that a guy had actually done it, but he had the idea of removing the doors. So that fly with a skidoo across, but as long as you don't have the doors at 90 degrees, then apparently it's fine. Well, I hadn't thought of that.
Less drag. Yeah.
There's innovation. Yeah. Oh my God.
It worked.
So.
Wow.
Let me ask this, not quite to do with flying, but when you got to Canada, did you speak English?
Yes, absolutely. I was.
Okay, so you learned English in school in France.
I learned English at school, and I spent a year in London. Well, after the war,
Okay.
Life was pretty miserable in France. So when I was 6 years old, my parents sent me for a year in England, where things were better. You could have some food. And that's where I learned the language.
Okay. Super. Oh, and at that age, it comes almost naturally, I would imagine, comparatively speaking. So, okay. All right. So, this is just some of these are the most terrifying stories, folks. I'm telling you, go get this amazing book.
I don't know where to, it's kind of like I don't know where to start. I'm stuck. I'm stuck with so many things.
I want to ask, I think then, so you started off, well, first of all, I was astounded by the incredible amount of money they threw at you to do this. Was it 3 cents a mile, direct line of sight?
A mile.
It's 3 cents a mile for the Cessnas, 4 cents a mile for the Beaver, and 5 cents a mile for the Otter. And that's all very good. But most of the work is to get the charts, because you need 20 or 30 charts. You've got to collect the charts, find out which is which. You've got to load the airplane. That's a pilot's job. You've got to fuel the airplane, pump the floats, and load the airplane. And that could take an hour or two to load the airplane. You've got to remove the seats and fill up the stuff. And then you try to take off if you're on water. See if it'll take off or not. And if it doesn't, then you come back to the dock and unload some gear and try again. And sometimes you've got to try 2 or 3 times before I could finally take off. And in some cases, fairly frequently, I had stuff piled up in the Otter and passenger on their belly above the gear, right below the ceiling. So I had 4 or 5 passengers. I had a ton of gear and drilling equipment or whatever. No room for the seats. So the passenger crawled above it. They were lying flat on their belly, with one guy sitting in the back, another one in the co-pilot's seat, and we tried to take off.
No.
And if it worked, fine. If it didn't, we have to unload some of the stuff. And then, so once you get going, most of our flights were several hours long, with sometimes there's refuel on stop, so you have to bring your own fuel and 45-gallon drum, stop and refuel. So they're a long trip. But you didn't know the weather. So while you were flying, you were looking forward and looking at, trying to figure out what kind of weather to expect. To find some clouds, you go underneath or below, go around. And then you have to stop if the weather gets too bad, because you can't turn around and come back. You don't get paid. You only get paid once you arrive. So sometimes up to 2 or 3 hours, you can't go any further. So you've got to stop, wait for the weather to clear up, and then you take off again and try to make it. And eventually, after a day or 2 or 3, sometimes you finally get there. And when you get there, it might be 300 miles. So you get $10.
Unbelievable.
Unload.
Right.
And the worst trip I did was to move a drilling camp from one side of a small island to another. It took an hour or 2 to load all the pipes on the airplane. And I only flew across the island from on the chart. It's a straight line. It was maybe 3 or 4 miles across the island. But I was so loaded that I had to go all the way around the island, back again on the other side, and spend another hour or 2 unloading the stuff. And then, so you get paid for 5 cents.
You made your 12 cents. What are you complaining about?
Oh my gosh!
At the end of the day, you get 12. After 3 or 4 hours of work, you get 12 cents.
that just seems insane to me. And so was there a lot of pilots that were willing to do that job? Is that why the pay?
Yeah,
the pay
in
was so
Yellowknife
shitty?
we were about a dozen pilots for maybe 3 or 4 companies over there. So the pilots were well known, and that's the only way you're going to make a pilot fly, is by paying him by the mile if he gets there. Otherwise, the pilots would turn around and said, "Oh no, it's too hard and it's too dangerous." So, but if you pay them
It was
when they
incentive.
get there, they'll find a
Yeah.
way to get there no matter what.
Yeah, but the loading, the preparation, the loading, the unloading, the fueling, that was all you were working for free at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And then
Oh
when
my
you
gosh.
stop and wait 24 hours for the weather to clear up and camp in the bush in the meantime, then you don't get paid either.
But at least you were able to carry, big, comfortable sleeping bags and air mattresses and tents. Oh, wait, no, none of that.
No.
Well,
Some of the stories of you, sleeping on the door in an abandoned church.
Yeah.
Sleeping under the table at the mayor's house or the chief of the
the chief, wherever you can. But I always carried a sleeping bag with me and a bunch of emergency equipment and some food.
Sure. And it came in handy on more than one occasion. If you read the book, you'll find out.
Yeah.
But when did you realize this was no normal flying job, that this was going to be, frankly, a hard life?
Well, I discovered that, first when they told me that they gave me a whole, that was the shock of my life. I was I got a job in Edmonton, and I thought I'd be following the pipelines or checking things in Alberta. And they gave me a suitcase, and I said, well, what's that? And they said, well, it's the maps you're going to need. I always needed one or two maps, and that's all I need. I don't need a suitcase. I said, well, where you're going, you need all these maps. And they covered the whole of northern Canada right up to the North Pole, from Alaska to the Hudson Bay. So that is a suitcase full of maps. And then I said, well, Jesus. And then I started flying north, and for hours and hours and hours, I was flying over a forest. I said, well, this country is humongous. And after about 5 hours, I stopped and refueled and continued with my little float plane. And I still had another 3 or 4 hours to go before I reached Great Slave Lake. I said, holy Christ, man. That's a big country. Once I got to Great Slave Lake, I was given initially some local flying. And that's okay because you can tell the land from the water. You've got lakes and forests and rocks, and that navigation without a compass, because it's too close to the magnetic pole. Navigation is okay when you can read the map. But when you go up north into the tundra, then it becomes a lot harder, because if you've seen on some of the pictures, the tundra extends for hundreds of miles. It's all flat. So you don't know where you are. And without a compass, you don't know where you're going either. That's exactly it. That's a tundra. And you've got 1,000 miles like this. So if it's in the summer, you can tell which way you're going roughly by the position of the sun. But in the winter, there is no sun. It's all gray, and it's either dark or gray, and it's terrifying. It's just is very scary in the winter. I used to pee in my pants. I was terrorized from.
Well, I mean, you're flying. You might as well be flying across the moon. There's nothing that's telling you where you're at. You can't, even if you could see the lakes are frozen. They got snow on them, so you can't see them.
Yeah, but you can't tell the lakes from the land. That's
right.
The problem.
Oh, geez.
So it's absolutely it's very scary. In fact, I was so scared that I couldn't sleep properly, and I woke up every morning with gigantic headaches. So I went to see the local physician and said, man, can you help me with my anxiety and my headaches? They said, no problem. So he gave me a bunch of little pills. And after 2 or 3 days, I was the happiest bush pilot in Yellowknife. I was going to work singing and laughing and thought nothing of it. And it was below IFR, and I still take off. It didn't bother me a bit. And after 2 or 3 days, I said, look, I've got to stop those pills. So I went back to having anxieties and nightmares and headaches. That's how I survived.
Oh my God. I'm going to have anxiety, nightmares, and headaches just from these stories. You mentioned something in passing that I don't think a vast majority of people, and I would say a fair number of pilots, are not even aware of, that the closer you get to the pole, your compass is pretty much useless. Can you explain why that is and what you did to overcome that?
Yeah, well, from around Yellowknife, you can still use the compass a little bit, but the magnetic compass is somewhere between Yellowknife and the North Pole. So that's right. It's a bit north of the Arctic coast and one of the Arctic islands, and it's moving all the time in that area. So when you get in the tundra, the magnetic compass just sits on one side or the other. The needle doesn't go anywhere because it say, "Hey, man, it's down below." So it tilts to one side and it points down and gets stuck one way. It doesn't show any direction, so you can only fly with the gyro compass. But the gyro compass holds your heading for maybe 20 minutes or half an hour. After that, it starts precessing, especially around the North Pole, around the poles. So after a while, you don't know if you can rely on it. And after an hour and a half, you can no longer rely on it. So it becomes very scary if you don't have landmarks. So the flying was done from landmark to landmark. You pick up a landmark, reset your gyro compass along the shoreline of the lake or the ridge of the ridge that you can find on the tundra or the shape of the orientation of the Arctic coast. Reset your gyro compass, and then you're good for a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. And after that, you're really not too sure where you're going. So it's very hard on the nervous system. And these are the charts you have to use.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
Fly. And you've got some frustrating passengers who tell you to go from here to there to somewhere else. And so as you go along, you have to make sure that you write it. So you see towards the lower third of the chart, there is a fairly horizontal line in a light pen, and that's because we took off from the camp on the bottom right side on the large lake, and then we flew roughly west from lake to lake because they were exploring the country looking for minerals. So they would go there, turn left, turn right. So we got a little bit to halfway through the page, and then they changed heading, and they said, go south, and then go to the southeast. So we went there for the southeast, and then the southwest, and then south onto another chart. And then if you don't follow it from lake to lake, then how the hell are you going to tell where you are and how you're going to come back? So you've got to be very careful. You mark it as you go along because they're exploring.
Great.
I'm stressed out right now. I'm very stressed out right now.
Right?
Just putting myself in that scenario. We are so spoiled today with being able to have GPS. Always know
it tells you where you are within 3 feet.
Oh yeah, and that's terrifying. Yeah. I mean, really.
Yeah.
I totally understand why you couldn't sleep very well. So just thinking about what you had to do the next day would be enough, right?
Exactly.
Right. So I think on one of the occasions you had gone to look for somebody's gear or a tent or something like that, and then you found it, and you wound up doing some pretty tight turns, and then landed and forgot to lock your gyro compass in place. It went turn, shut down, and of course now it's tumbling. And since it wasn't locked, you didn't know which way was northeast, west, south. How did you recover from something like that?
Well, I didn't. I took off. And I was horrified when I was setting my DD. Discovered that I hadn't locked it on landing when it's still working, and I had set it up on some landmark half an hour before, so I could still trust it roughly. So I landed, pick up my two passengers who had been forgotten for 3 months. We just
that's right. It was the two prospectors that were
two prospectors. Yeah, we dropped them, and they were in t-shirts and shorts and sandals in the summer. And then the winter came along and the lakes were frozen. We had to wait until it was frozen solid enough so we could land and pick them up. And nobody could find them because we didn't know exactly where they had been dropped. And they had a little white tent in the middle of nowhere. How the hell were we going to find it? A little white tent in the tundra, because the lakes are not even marked on the map. and they're not named. So only the pilot who drops them off knows where they are. And he puts in the proximate position with the pin on the chart. Well, that pilot left and went to fly somebody else after that.
Of course.
So nobody knew exactly where they were. So we sent pilot after pilot for several days. And I just happened to bump into them and flying at very low level just by the tent to pick them up. But then I forgot to lock the gyro upon landing. So on takeoff, I had absolutely no idea. I didn't even know where we were on the map. I just had found them and stopped to pick them up. Didn't know which lake it was, but it's probably not even marked on the map. So I took off because it was getting dark, and I should have stopped there and then called for help on HF. But I took off and then went around and around and trying to find a landmark, and I eventually found a large lake which was still partially open. So it was large enough to be shown on the map and was able to recognize it. But by then it was getting so dark and we were flying so close between the hills and very low stratus. It was getting dark. We were 3 hours away from Yellowknife. I had to land. So I landed on the end of the lake, which was frozen, but I didn't know how thick the ice was. I didn't like the landing. That's the only place I could land. And so we landed and we spent 20 hours in the dark. And when the daylight came up around 10 o'clock the next morning, we took off, and I knew that I could recognize the lake, so I could reset my compass, and with that we were able to go home. So yeah.
This is a whole nother level of stress and craziness.
Oh,
Yeah,
it is. It is. Yeah. And I think you said that the prospectors they were actually quite jovial. They were obviously happy to be alive.
They'd be mad, but I didn't think they'd be still alive, because they survived because they had managed to shoot one caribou, and that they ate the whole caribou, including pieces that you don't normally eat.
I bet.
And to keep warm, they had made a stove out of aluminum.
Was it a suitcase, you said?
Aluminum suitcase.
Yeah.
They had. So they cut a hole in the cover, in the suitcase, and put some tin cans, one after the other, and cut a hole in the top of the tent. And that was the chimney. So, and they cooked whatever they did not eat from the caribou. They cooked, they burned the antlers and the skin and the bones and the hooves and whatever they could. And by the time I arrived, they had no food for a long time and no heating system for several days already. So it was time to pick them up.
Yeah. I'd say so. Holy smokes.
So on the way back, when we got close to town, I called the office by HF an hour in advance and told them that those guys need some food and some drink and some smokes. So by the time I arrived, they each had a hamburger ready, some French fries, some Coke, and the manager had a bottle of whiskey, and he each gave them a glass of whiskey, which they deserved.
Right.
So they were very happy when they started eating all this food and drinking the whiskey and smoking the cigarette. They were like new men. And then they disappeared. They disappeared in town. I guess they were looking for a woman, I imagine, and then they go back to normal after that. That's how prospectors work. When you come back from town, you celebrate for a while, totally useless for 2 or 3 days, and then they go back to normal.
Absolutely amazing. Holy smokes. Well, and so you did a lot of floats, skis and wheels, yes, that sort of thing. The interesting thing I found out was that you talked about the floats tended to fill up with water. You spent a lot of time pumping the floats out. I've got a friend who's got a Skywagon on floats, and I don't ever recall him having to pump those things out. But that was just a normal matter of course?
Well, the thing is, in the bush, you have to land pretty well, no matter what the conditions are, even in very rough water.
Okay.
The floats take the hell of a beating. And then you have to park the float plane on gravel beaches against rocks, and you have to fly in and out of rivers which are very shallow. So occasionally, for instance, when you take off, you have to turn the airplane into the stream and let it go back downriver until the cliff or the turn or the fall, and then you take off. And when you drift back slowly, you can hit some rocks and damage the pontoons.
Gotcha.
And I have one colleague who doing exactly that, punched a pontoon so much that he couldn't fix it, and so he had to call for a helicopter to come in. He had a few passengers with him. Helicopter came in with a pump, with a little engine pump, portable pump. And he installed the engine on the pontoon, on the Otter. And the pump was pumping the pontoon, the compartment, while he was taking off and flying.
That's right. I remember that.
The hole was so
terrifying,
big,
right?
It was
Yes.
filling up the compartment. Before he could take off, he would have been half sunk. So he had to have the pump going on the water.
And you said more than one guy balled up an airplane in that stretch of river trying to get out of there.
Yeah, exactly. I had a manager who did exactly that. He came in and he tried to take off with 2 passengers at a time. Well, he was more audacious than I was. I only took 1 passenger off at a time and a little bit of gear, 1 at a time, and then found a lake from where we could take off with a full load. But he tried to take 2 passengers at a time. So he took off and didn't have the space and ended up hitting the rocks in the fast current and rocks upriver from the takeoff. So he hit some rocks in there and rolled the airplane in a ball, and they tumbled down. Mind you, it's very shallow. So they rolled down the river until they came to a stop further down, and they waded back to a beach and then waited a couple of days until somebody noticed they were missing and came to pick
Oh, my
them up.
gosh.
Right? I mean, that's the worst part of it, is having to wait till someone notices you aren't where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and then give a couple more days because they're probably just delayed.
Yeah, exactly.
In the meantime,
Right. Could be weather. Could be weather.
Could be weather, yeah. So that's if somebody knows what you're doing, because a lot of like the trip I was doing with prospectors, they wanted to explore the whole area, so it'd be gone for 5 hours exploring the tundra. But they just look at the places. They want to go here, I want to check that, and just survey. So nobody knows where we're going.
right. The other thing that I like, the part, I think it was in that same chapter you talked about it, because you mentioned the helicopter coming in to bring the pump, and this is typical of pilots, though. Guys get in a helicopter, going to land in a tight clearing, and he's like, yeah, I don't think so. And tell him what the passenger said, and then what happened.
Well, a colleague of mine who was a helicopter pilot said he was asked to go somewhere and land in a small clearing. And so he had a passenger, and the pilot looked at it and said, well, I don't think it fits in that. There's not enough room to go down. And the pilot said, oh yeah, there is. I was there 2 weeks ago. So he said, well, if somebody else can do it, then sure, I could do it too. So he came down, and sure enough, he hit the propeller, the rotor tip, and demolished his helicopter. And so the pilot said to the passenger, well, I thought you could land. And he said, oh yeah, he could land, but then he had exactly the same problem. He broke the helicopter.
That'd have been nice to know.
I didn't say you could take off again.
So if somebody tells you that he got in, make sure that you get the full story. Did he get out?
Right? Oh my gosh.
Great
So,
stuff.
I have a question. I've been dying to ask you. So, because this is no small thing, you're carrying fuel in barrels with you
Yes.
for range and a fuel stop if you need it. But
Hold on, I have a question. What could possibly go wrong?
So a 45 gallon barrel, right?
Yes.
These are not easy to move around. They're
That's
not
a few hundred pounds.
No.
Yeah, well, 45 times what's avgas? 6.7 or 6.8 pounds a gallon.
Yeah, they're pretty heavy, especially the odd ones which are made of steel. Some of made.
Yeah, so how do you maneuver the? I mean, you don't look like a weightlifter kind of guy. And
No, but you need a couple of rails along which you roll the barrels, and it really takes two people to roll a barrel up on the floor, and then you can straighten up the barrel. And I've flown in an order up to 6 or even 7 barrels. So that's grossly overloaded, but it's a single engine. So whether it's overloaded or not, if the engine quits, it's the same problem. So, I wouldn't do that on a twin engine airplane, but on a single engine airplane, it doesn't matter if it's overloaded, you go down anyhow. So
when you get to where you need to get a fuel stop, if you're by yourself, you got to wrestle that barrel off and then pump it into the wings.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what I did many times. You unload you just roll it off. It falls on the tundra, straighten it up, and you carry a wobble pump and a filter. It has to be a filter to retain the rust from the barrel, but also the moisture which accumulates in the gasoline. So you have to have a filter. And one day, somehow I lost my filter. I was up the Arctic coast with some fishermen, and I lost the filter. Well, you can't pump the fuel from the drum onto the airplane when it's got water and rust in it. So I didn't know what to do. And then so I looked around, and I told one of my American passengers, is your hat a felt hat? And he said, yes. Well, I said, I'm sorry, man, but
now it's my filter.
To use your hat as a filter, because otherwise we're stuck here. And he was all excited. And so he rode back to the States, his hat full of gasoline fumes. So that saved the day, and we used my hat to continue the trip.
Oh my gosh.
Here's a novel idea. How about using new barrels and fueling without water in it the day you're leaving? I know. Yeah. I get some of it was pre-staged, right? I mean, it's my understanding you said some of it was dropped off on the Arctic coast.
Yeah, some barrels are there for years at a time, and some of them are sealed. The new ones are sealed, so they should pick up too much water. But others are not sealed, so they pick up moisture. And you have to filter the water.
And in fact, did you find some barrels dated U.S. Navy in the 1940s?
Yes, on the east coast of the Hudson Bay. I was stuck without fuel one day. I'd flown, and I had enough fuel to go back to the previous station and refuel, but it was 3 hours away, and I didn't want to fly another 6 hours to go and pick up fuel. And by the time I got to the community, I would have only have a little fuel to continue, so it didn't really help. And so I was stuck, and one Inuit told me, I think I've seen a barrel somewhere on a tundra by the shoreline. So we went to see him, and it said U.S. Navy, 1944. So, So I tried it. And I took off. I tried, and the airplane, the engine ran. So I took off and tried the airplane by myself to see if it worked, and then it was still working. So we continued with that fuel.
Shit.
It's time to go fly. And then
you guys wait here. I'm going to test this out and see if it works.
Right. So we've got a couple supporters we need to talk about in a minute. What I would like to do, though, is have you chat just a little bit more about the Inuit culture. You talked about how there's very few declarative statements of positive and assertive.
Maybe your face is
Maybe
frozen.
you could talk to us about that.
Maybe you could give us an explanation about that.
Sorry, about what about the Inuits?
So that there's very few declarative and positive statements like it's going to rain tomorrow or I will see you next week.
That one, yeah, they're very shy and they're really not sure of anything. So if you ask them when this person leaves the community by canoe for several days, they will say, I don't know, because they didn't see him actually leave. So then you have to ask, well, at what time or when did he intend to leave? Or you say, oh, that was Friday. Oh, okay, so now you know he probably left on Friday. And then you ask him, at what time is he going to come back? The guy says, I don't know. At what time did he say he would come back? Oh, he says next Wednesday. So and you ask them, how is the weather going to be tomorrow? And they will always tell you the weather is going to be fine because they know that you need fine weather to fly airplanes.
Maybe the weather's going to be fine.
Want you to be happy, right? And I found a guy who told me the weather is going to be fine. And then I discovered, I went around the community with his skidoo, in the back of his skidoo, and the snow in winter. And I discovered that he was putting tarp over some of his gear and putting away other stuff.
Get ready for a big storm.
Yeah, he was getting, and he told me that the weather, maybe it's always maybe the weather will be fine, maybe. And I knew from what he was doing that the weather wasn't going to be fine. And sure enough, it blew like hell. It was snow the next day, and there was no way of flying.
The process.
There's so much unknown, and it's so surprising, and you never know what to expect. That half the time they start with maybe. One day I was in the winter. It was miserable. 40 below, was on the Arctic coast on the ice cap, pumping fuel with the help of an Inuit, and on an otter on ski. It was pitch black, and very cold. So he looks at me and say, maybe your ear is frozen. Well, I said,
right.
Maybe it's frozen.
Maybe your cheek is frozen. Maybe your cheek.
Maybe your cheek is frozen. So I said, well, maybe I should go and check. So I went to check, and sure enough, I went back to walking to the community, and on the mirror in the little shack which had a light bulb. I looked at my cheek, and sure enough, it was frozen solid. It was all white.
Oh,
no maybe about it. So I warmed it up and then went back, and it was okay. But if you hadn't told me, I would have a big hole in the cheek.
Oh, maybe you could have said something sooner.
Maybe you could let me know when it looked like it was getting frozen.
Right? Oh boy.
Gosh.
Well, Fig, we want to welcome back this week HelloFresh. They've been a longtime sponsor here, and we're deeply appreciative of them coming back. And so we'd like to talk to you about them, and as well, FTIratings.com, who is also a longtime sponsor. So thanks to both of them. So there I was, thinking about what to cook when I remembered HelloFresh has me covered. Plans change, life gets busy, and HelloFresh gets it. You can easily customize your delivery from week to week, adjust the delivery date, or even skip a week if you won't be home. Total flexibility. Plus, the menu options are endless, whether you're into fit and wholesome, quick and easy, vegetarian, or need something family-friendly. There's something for everyone. You'll never be stuck eating the same thing again. But wait, it gets better. Want to swap out a protein or make it veggie-friendly? No problem. You can easily customize your meals, and don't forget to check out the HelloFresh Market for delicious add-ons to jazz up your delivery. Now, let me tell you why I love it. I hate cooking. Seriously, I hate it. I would rather do anything than cook. I'd rather sit hungry for hours than deal with meal preparation. But with HelloFresh, the hard part is done for me. Everything's pre-measured and the recipe card is foolproof. All I have to do is follow along and suddenly I've made dinner and my lovely wife gets a break for the night. It's a win-win. Now, the best part? For free breakfast for life, go to HelloFresh.com/free. So there I was. One free breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/free. So there I was. And remember, HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. Thinking about how to get that ATP or type rating? I found the answer. Flight Training International, also known as FTIratings.com. Since 1993, FTI has been helping pilots like you, whether you're fresh out of the military or just looking to up your game. FTI isn't your typical flight school. It's veteran-founded, and their instructors know exactly what it takes because they've done it themselves. We're talking decades of real-world experience, flying everything from military jets to commercial airliners. And don't worry, these aren't some dodgy old light twins you'll be flying that smell like sweat socks and avgas. They've got full-motion FAA-certified simulators, the same ones the major airlines use. It's like you're actually in the cockpit, minus the peanuts and passenger complaints. And the best part, you can study wherever and whenever. Thanks to their innovative iPad app, you're ready to train wherever life takes you. Oh, and veterans, listen up. You can use your veterans benefits to cover the cost. FTI has your back, from mastering the Airline Transport Certification Training Program, ATP-CTP, to getting your type rating. Plus, if you mention, "So there I was," when you sign up, you'll snag $100 off your first course. So what are you waiting for? Go to FTIratings.com and start your journey to becoming a top-tier airline pilot today. FTIratings.com. Don't just fly, soar. Fantastic. Thank you so much, HelloFresh and FTI Ratings, Flight Training International. We do appreciate your support. So we can continue to bring you these terrifying and amazing stories.
Yes. So I want to comment on the process of it's amazing to me how you're flying the Arctic. It's winter. It's cold. It's beyond belief cold. The prep that you have to do to the airplane before you even walk away from it. I saw, where I read you had to leave it running at idle for a significant period of time so that it would cool down slowly. And then when it was shut off, then you had to you had to apply all this other apparatus to it to keep it from freezing. And then
pour gasoline in the oil. And
yes. And then you had to take the batteries in. And did you ever drain the oil and take the oil with you to keep it warm somewhere? I mean, this is a lot of work. And I'm thinking the whole time, you're not even getting paid to do this. You are only getting paid by the mile.
He's getting his 12 cents a day, whether he needs it or not, man. Come on.
Oh, my gosh. I mean, that's a lot of work. And plus the extreme conditions. I mean, literally extreme conditions.
Yeah, talk to us about some of the airplane prep, please.
Yeah, well, before the flight in winter, you have to start preparing the airplane at least 2 hours before you can hope to go. That's assuming that the airplane is all prepared with the right amount of oil and you don't need to gas it up and you don't need to load it. That's just the preparation, the technical preparation of the airplane itself. And so what you have to do is go to the airplane and you have to put blow pots underneath the engine. Now you can imagine those are aviation gasoline containers with a heating system like to warm up a pot of water with flames. And so you put fill it up with gasoline and turn it on, and you've got this contraption which is about a foot high with flames sticking out of it. And you carry it underneath the order. It was mostly done with the order, underneath the fuel tanks. So you pass by the fuel tanks, which are always a bit dripping because before takeoff, you have to press a little button to drain some. If there is any water at the bottom of the tank, you have to drain it before every flight. So there's always a little bit of gasoline floating underneath it. And you bring one blow pot underneath the oil tank and the other blow pot underneath the cylinder. And the engine is covered with a tent, which goes right down to the ground, to the snow. So you put the blow pots there, but before the blow pots, you need to have aluminum tubes, the chimney tubes, that you put one above the other to connect the blow pots to the oil tank. So there's a stovepipes, and connect the other blow pot to the cylinders, those stovepipes. So you get it. And it takes about 45 minutes to warm up the cylinder and the oil enough that you can start moving the propeller, which is otherwise frozen solid. You can't budge it. So when you start being able to move the propeller, that means the oil is no longer congealed, so that you may be able to start the engine. So then you remove the blow pots, you remove the stovepipes, and you remove the tent, and you remove the board which is in front of the radial engine. Everything run into the cabin, and in the meantime you have or have not reloaded the battery, which weighs about 50 pounds in the back. Sometimes you take it out for the night, sometimes you don't. And you start cranking up the engine and see if it'll fire. And usually it does. So it fires, and then you need to watch the oil pressure. If it doesn't go up within a minute, then you have to shut down the engine because the oil is frozen somewhere in the lines and you've got to start all over again. If the oil pressure comes up within a minute, then you let the engine run or idle and increasing progressively. And it takes 45 minutes of running the engine at idle until it's warm enough that when you accelerate, you get full power. And so the whole process takes about 2 hours. And then finally the engine is running ready to go, and you can tell the passengers that they can come in. But in the meantime, you have to climb on the wing on the otter, and it's quite high, so you've got to make sure you don't. It's very slippery. And with a broom, you have to brush off the frost on top of the wings. And if you can, on top of the tail too.
Sure.
So the operation. And when you come in to land and want to park the engine, the airplane, then you have to make sure you put some branches underneath the skis or raise the skis to let the airplane rest on wheels if it has wheels also, so that the skis don't get stuck during the night on the snow.
Right. It'll get frozen to the snow.
Right.
Yeah, it frozen on the snow. And then you have to let the engine cool down for about half an hour or 45 minutes until it's cold enough that you can add gasoline on the oil. So you pour about a gallon of aviation gasoline in the oil tank, and then briefly start the engine to mix it all up to dilute the oil. And
to lower the viscosity.
that is done. Then you can put the cover on the front cover in front of the radial engine, and you put the tent over it. And depending on the condition, you take or do not take the battery out and keep it somewhere warm so it doesn't freeze overnight. So
Amazing.
it's a long process.
I'm exhausted.
And on top of that, there is a loading and unloading of the airplane. And
Oh yeah, then there's that.
Of course. But at least you're always warm. You had plenty of warm clothes, and the wind was never blowing or anything.
Busy.
Okay, so speaking of always warm, Matt Geyer, who's listening, asked, what did you carry as a survival kit on your everyday trips? Other than what I was assuming a sleeping bag, what else did you carry?
There is an official safety or emergency box on the airplane. Well, I used it once or twice, and there's hardly anything in it. There is a little pack of matches, book of matches. There was a little package of pilot biscuits and a can of tuna and a few things. This is ridiculous. It's enough for one person for 24 hours. It's just silly when you've got 10 passengers on board. So I used to carry my own gear. So I had an Arctic sleeping bag and a down sleeping bag, because the Arctic sleeping bag in 40 below, I think, is not really enough. So I had my own down sleeping bag to go inside the Arctic sleeping bag. And I had a mirror to reflect whatever sunlight I could pick up into the eyes of an observer plane which was looking for me, if any. That's the best way to be found, is to reflect the sunlight into some other pilot's eye so that he notices the flash. I had some red flares, and I had some high energy food, some sugar and chocolate and biscuits with fruits in them. And what else? And a little burner. And the most important thing was matches in a watertight container. So that was my gear. So I had a bag with my gear and another big bag with a sleeping bag and a down jacket.
Okay. And I recall you carried an Enfield 303 also, right? Often?
Yes. I carried a World War II gun and with a box or two of cartridges to fight off the polar bears or kill a caribou or a moose for survival. And I used it once. It wasn't really for survival, but I was stuck on a small rocky island, which is maybe 100 meters long and 50 meters wide. And it was tundra, nothing in it. But there was a rabbit on it. And I hadn't had any food for a long time. I had no food with me. So I said, well, I'm going to use my gun to shoot the rabbit. The rabbit couldn't go anywhere because it was a very small island. So it took me most of the day chasing the rabbit with my World War II rifle. And I used up a whole bunch of shells until finally I got my rabbit and was able to drain some gasoline from the engine and pour it on the ground and make a burner out of it and cook some of the rabbit.
Oh, man. Wow.
I'm glad I didn't have to rely on my gut, my aiming ability to survive in the Arctic.
Well, a rabbit's a bit of a smaller target, but you mentioned some of the waterproof stuff. I'd like to briefly go to, I think it was chapter 7, where you had 3 folks with you, and I mentioned it earlier about the pontoons filling with water, and you found an abandoned village, and if you would chat about that one, I have got some questions about that. Are you familiar? Do you need more of a hint?
I'm not sure which one.
Okay, you landed. You said the ocean was too rough, so you landed on the river, and then you pulled the airplane up near the rocks, but it was high tide, and so you needed to have it offshore just a little bit. All the tents in the village were abandoned and had rotting and skins and fish, and you found an abandoned church, which you ultimately slept.
That's the place where I was trying to fly back from the Arctic coast with 3 American fishermen who spent the day fishing Arctic char, not getting any char. So at the end of the day, after 24 hours, because of daylight all the time,
Yeah.
they bought, for $1, they bought an Arctic char for one of the natives so that they would have something to show for the trip when they come back. So they wrapped it up in newspaper and we were flying home. And we couldn't. The weather was too rough. It was with a Cessna 185. So we tried and pushed the weather, flying through it or into it and below it and zigzagging. So after several hours, I turned around and came back and landed in a small community on the Arctic coast, which was totally abandoned. It was shacks and houses. And so we landed on the river, and because of the tide, I couldn't park the airplane the normal way by dragging the pontoons backwards up on a shelf on a beach, gravel beach, with the nose pointing out so you can easily take off. It would have been high and dry, so I let it float, and with my 3 passengers in it. And eventually, the next day, I went to sleep on the church, abandoned church there, and the door was missing. There was nothing inside the church. Half the floor was gone. So I slept on the door, which had been removed from the hinges. And the next morning, one passenger came in and said, well, maybe we could go. And when I looked at the airplane, it was sunk. The nose was sticking out. The front of the cabin was above water. But half the pontoon, or 2/3 of the pontoons, were underwater.
No.
And one of the passengers in the meantime had joined me, but he hadn't said anything. So I said, well, what the hell happened? And he said, well, the man, there was a man and a woman and a young fellow. So the man and the woman said, well, during the night, it started sinking. So this other fellow went out, and because the 2 front seats were occupied, we both moved to the front where it was dry, and the back started sinking into the water, and it sunk with it, and we sunk with it until it stopped when it rested on the bottom. The nose was sticking out because it was attached to the shoreline. So Jesus, well, how are we going to get out of here? And so I spent about 48 hours. There was low stratus and drizzle, and the ice was about a mile away from shore, and it was, I think, in July. So the water wasn't very warm. So because of the light drizzle, we had no towel and no other set of clothes. So I took my clothes off, and I spent about 24 hours working in and around the airplane in the water and trying to get it out. And I eventually found 4 empty 10-gallon kegs in the community, all rusted and beaten up, which I used. And so I was swimming to the back of the airplane and diving and attaching rope to the back of the pontoon and going up and trying to wrap the rope around the 10-gallon keg and tighten up to lift the bottom of the pontoons. And eventually it took me about 24 hours to do that, or more, maybe 36 hours of nonstop working around naked and trying to get this back of the airplane up in the water. And every time it came up a little bit, I ended up with 4 10-gallon kegs at the back, 2 for each back of the pontoon. And every time it came up a little bit, I was able to pump a little bit of water out of the pontoon until eventually the whole airplane was off the water, could pump up the floats and tell the passengers we're off.
But the ice was a mile away, so the water wasn't frozen yet. It was plenty warm. I'm just saying.
It was on a river, and it was July, so it was getting better from week to week. But it's a little river, and so there was no risk of freezing. But
still, I bet that water, I could be wrong, but I bet that water had to be at least 60 degrees, if not cooler.
It was
Sure.
pretty cold. Yes.
Yeah.
But there's a swimming and the diving and trying to attach ropes at the bottom to pick up around the back of the pontoons and try swimming with a 10-gallon keg and wrap around a rope around it and try to
No.
pull it so that the bottom of the pontoon back of the pontoon comes back up to the surface.
Yeah.
You've got no leverage. You're just floating around swimming. It's just very frustrating. But eventually it worked.
Astounded by that story of survival alone, just because. So I live in New England, and it's past August, but you go out in the Atlantic Ocean here in August, and the water is at its warmest. It's about 60 to 62 degrees. Stand in that water knee deep for 10 minutes, and your bones ache.
Yeah.
And here he is, 24 hours fighting this fight fighting for your very life. I mean, nobody knew where you were, right?
No, nobody knew where we were.
Yeah. No SATCOM, no GPS.
No, nothing.
That's
So in the meantime, my passenger, they ate the fish that they had, the $1 fish that they had bought from the Inuits. Yeah.
Right. Best gourmet fish meal they'd had in a while, I bet.
Yeah. So I tried to catch some little squirrels, and I couldn't. And I tried to catch some fish. We had a bit of a net in the survival box, and it was a bit of a net which is about 3 feet long and 1 foot deep. When you throw that across the water, and you can wait all you want, there's not going to be any fish in it. So that was useless. And we did have some pilot biscuits and a can of tuna, but the lady opened the can and she said it was too fat, so she threw it away. We could have been there. I thought we'd be there.
You're
for
going
a
to
week.
want that.
Well, I thought we'd be there for a week before anybody finds us, because I wasn't sure at all we'd be able to get out of here.
I'm not very often speechless, but I am speechless. So that is a good segue. I don't remember which chapter. It might be chapter 9, where you landed on a frozen lake. You had your bride with you, and the airplane sunk through the ice.
Yes.
This turned into a real survival situation.
That was rather extreme. That was very lucky. That was in November.
Lucky.
And I had a flight to bring fuel with a Cessna 180 to a prospectors camp about 3 hours away from Yellowknife, just east of Great Slave Lake, close to the tree line. And since I was going there, drop the fuel and come back, and there was an empty seat next to me, I told my new wife, we'd just been married for 2 or 3 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
I told my new wife, well, look, come and share my work with me and see what I do for a living. So she said, fine. And the weather wasn't too bad. It was overcast. So we flew about 3 hours, I think, or 4 hours to get to the camp. And I found the camp and made a very smooth landing, done purposely smoothly because I wanted to impress my wife on,
of course,
my flying ability and other talents. So we landed, and we were just about to stop right in front of the camp when all of a sudden I had a big crunch, and then the countryside disappeared. Everything became gray. And I said, well, where is it? Where is everything? There was a lake and some trees and rocks, and everything all of a sudden is gray. And I scratched my head. I just couldn't figure out where did it go? What happened? And then I realized from a little bubble which came up from the propeller hub that we were underwater, and I was looking at the bottom of the lake. This is why it was all gray. And I know this little ripple on the sand. So I said, Jesus, we're at 45 degrees looking at the bottom of the lake and the airplane is going down. So my first reaction was to open the door to let the water in, because if you don't let the water in, that's the picture. If you don't let the water in, then you can't get out anymore. So the water rushed in, and it was coming up over the seats. So and I unbuckled my seatbelt, and the water was coming up to cover my wife's legs and thighs and belt, and I was partially out holding the door, like gentlemen open the doors for a lady on the car, lady, do you mind coming out? And waiting for it, say, well, just come out, we're sinking, do something. And then she had some mitts on, she had to remove her mitts, and then she couldn't unbuckle the belt underwater because she didn't know exactly how the belt worked. And I said, come on, don't think about it, just do it. And so eventually she came out, and we were both underwater for a second, and popped out. And so we swam, and I pushed her over the ice because the ice was about an inch thick. So, and she's light. So I helped her onto the ice, and she was able to stay on the ice because she was light. But I couldn't. Whenever I pressed on the ice, it broke, and I couldn't push myself above the ice. What do I do? So
Oh my God.
I stretched in the water and eventually rolled onto the ice so that the ice held my weight.
Oh.
And we ran to the cabins through the snow. It turned out the camp had been abandoned for months. There were three shacks, and it was locked. There's no way to get in. There's nobody around. And all my gear is way in the back behind 4 or 5 10-gallon kegs of fuel underwater and under the ice. And it's 35 below, and I'm not going back there, and I won't have time to get my stuff out. So what do we do? So I told my wife to keep walking quickly around one of the shacks to not lose any heat. And in the meantime, I forced my way into one of the cabins, which was a kitchen. So we went inside and turned everything upside down looking for matches. And looked in all the cupboards and all the drawers. There had no matches. So I tried the other shack, which was totally empty, and the third shack, which had a stove and some bunk beds without any mattresses, but was empty also, no mattress anywhere. So we come back to the first shack, and by then my muscles were getting stiff. My fingers were curled up, and I was beginning to have problems thinking properly and moving very slowly. And my wife had stopped moving altogether. So I got mad, said, and she said, I can't. She was frozen solid because our clothes were wet, and the outside of our clothes was already covered in ice. We looked like snowmen. I stopped on the outside, 35 below. So I said, well, let's get in. And I told her to sit down on the floor against the wall. And before I sat down with her, I closed the door so that the wolves wouldn't tear us apart. I closed the door and said, well, that's it. We'll be dead in 10 minutes. And it's not painful at all. We're not scared, or we didn't feel the cold at all. We're just not even shaking, nothing. Just that we couldn't move, and I couldn't move my fingers anymore. And before I sat down next to her, I decided to go around the shack one more time, the kitchen, and I found one little package of paper matches. And with that, I rushed to the third shack where there was a stove. I pulled out all the geology maps and the pinup girls from the wall, piled it up in the stove, and tried to take one match, but I couldn't because my fingers were too clumsy. So the whole lot of matches came off, and I stroked them, and it worked. The whole thing went up in flame, and I threw it in the paper, and it burned. It took off, and there was a pile of wood outside. So after a while we were able to come in and warm up, and we tore off our clothes because of the ice sheet around it, our down jackets, and remove all our wet clothes, and then we stood naked in front of the stove until we could warm up and eventually start shivering a little bit. And from then on, we were fine. So that night, we still couldn't use our clothes. So we found a tent and rolled ourselves into a tent and used one of the bunks and spent the night there. And the next morning, we heard a Beach 18 come over from my company. They wondered why we hadn't come back yet. So he understood the situation easily. And the tail of the airplane was sticking out and the top of the wings. That's it. And so I wrote on the ice, please drop sleeping bags. And the little paper came back floating down a few minutes later saying, I'm sorry, no sleeping bag, but we'll come back and get you out when we can. So he disappeared. And after that...
Yeah, that is phenomenal. So you said she'd been with you about 3 weeks at that point. Did you ask her then, how do you like me so far?
No, I was afraid that she'd go home to her mom after that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
no.
And here you are 50 years later.
50 years later, she's still around.
Congratulations.
Yeah, what a story. That's just it's the survival part of it. What the will to keep moving.
But that was just pure luck. It was just one little package of matches, and that was it. That saved us, just purely by accident.
Just terrifying, amazing, incredible. That's just wow. Yeah. That's fabulous. Well, I think it's time. Oh, go ahead, Fig.
I was just going to ask how many hours of bush flying did you have?
I have about 5,000 hours of bush flying.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
And every one of them, it sounds like extreme. I mean, there's nothing normal about doing that kind of flying there. Yeah, and as Matt said about your bride, she's a keeper indeed. If you can dunk a woman in ice water and have her hang with you 50 years, you're doing something right. So, and that's a good woman. Oh man. So. Well, I think I'd like to take us to a story that will close us out for the day, and that is the one with which you opened. You found yourself in a terrifying situation over the tundra, icing up, out of airspeed. Well, not out of airspeed, but out of ideas and out of power.
Yeah.
What happened? How did that come to an end? Because you're here. Ice. Yeah, you didn't hit a mountainside.
Yeah, well, it was a flight with a single otter radial engine flying along the Arctic coast for about 5 hours with a group of 10 fishermen coming back to their lodge on Great Bear Lake. And we were essentially following the Arctic Circle from east to west of Great Bear Lake. And we started flying underneath the clouds, and it became totally insane. So I couldn't get back to the outpost. It was closed back, so I was stuck. So I climbed through it, got on top, and I was bothered because I couldn't see the ground anymore, but I could at least fly west by looking at the sun and finding my direction from the sun. So I put the charts away because they were useless, just flying on top.
Right. And
hopefully in the right direction. But the top of the clouds came higher and higher. Eventually we got in the clouds, and I didn't like it because it was above freezing. But I know that at one point, we get to the freezing conditions and pick up ice. And sure enough, after half an hour, 45 minutes in the clouds, flying with a directional gyro, and at that time it was getting totally unreliable. I was off by maybe 10 or 15 degrees, or at least 10 degrees. I didn't know which way. So it was a general direction, no landmark, had no idea where I was. I wasn't sure within 10 degrees which way I was going in the clouds. And we started picking up ice. So I added more power and more power and more power until I had takeoff power, and even more. I think I had the boosting system on, and takeoff flaps, and we were descending at 500 foot a minute. So I looked at the altimeter. It was slowly unwinding, and I said, well, at that rate, 500 foot a minute, we got about 15 or 18 minutes before we hit the tundra. And I looked back at the passengers, the 10 passengers, because I thought maybe I should tell them, you've got 8 minutes to go. 10 minutes
make your peace, folks.
Yeah,
Oh, gosh.
you do whatever, but that's your last moment. So do whatever you want. You can pray, you can get drunk, you can talk to your wife, you can write messages. But then I got scared because I thought they start moving inside the airplane to go back and get their luggage and find out some notes and start writing messages to their wife, saying to their wife, look, you find me with my secretary, but I was strictly a business trip, or other personal messages, or they want to be with their wife who's in the back of the airplane. So I said, the airplane is so unstable that I can't afford anybody to move. So I said, well, they're happy, I'm happy. Why change anything? So I never send them any message to let them know. And so we were going down. And by the time we got to 4,000 feet, the person next to me woke up. There was an inch of ice or half an inch of ice on the windshield. So there's nothing to look at in the clouds anyhow. And there's nothing to see on the sides either. So the passenger next to me woke up and he looked at the altimeter, 4,000 feet, looked at his watch, looked at the altimeter, and pointed it to me and said, "Are you sure it's 4 o'clock? I have 4:15." So I didn't say anything, and then he noticed the altimeter was unwinding, and it was 3:45 and 3:30. So he realized
we're going fast. Time's running backwards.
Time is going backwards. And then when I knew we were getting close to the tundra, and I knew from experience that it was fogged and solid right on the ground. We hit the ground without seeing it. I thought I opened the side window to try to see the ground when it came, so that I could try to absorb the shock and do a rounding.
A little bit of a flare.
The ground, flare, before hitting the ground at cruising speed, or faster than cruising speed. We had to go faster to maintain flying. And then all of a sudden, the everything which had been gray all the time became dark. So you go, well, that change means we're going to hit the tundra. And I still couldn't see it, but it became dark very slowly. And then the grass and the little rocks appeared all of a sudden. So I just pulled back, leveled off, and we passed at cruising speed a whole chain of rocks. And I thought we were going to stall them. And then I figured, well, this is really unfair. If we had hit the grass, maybe we'd bounce a couple of times and turn upside down. Some of us might survive. But if we hit the rocks at 120 miles an hour, it's hopeless. So we eventually stalled and fell on the rocks. And we just missed the rocks. We just passed them. And when we hit the ground, it turned out it was water. So the rocks were at the edge of a lake, which I couldn't see because of the thick fog. And when we hit water, and we're pontooned, and we just at the right angle. So the shock wasn't brutal. In fact, it was a smooth landing. And that's when the passenger probably looked out and wondered why we were landing in the tundra in total fog at such high speed. But anyhow, they didn't complain. So, and as soon as we hit water, I didn't know whether it was landing on a river or on a lake or across a lake. Couldn't see anything in front because of the ice and the fog. Couldn't see anything on the side of my window. It's just water and fog. But on the passenger side, I could see the shoreline because we had crossed it at 45 degrees. So through his window, which he opened, I could see the shoreline. And I told him, look for a place where we can park the airplane. If you see a beach, any kind of a spot, just let me know. So, and guide me. I told him, guide me along the shoreline because I don't see anything and I can't see the shoreline. So guide me on the shoreline. And he did. He turned left and right to follow the shoreline. Stay and tell me when you see a little beach. And all of a sudden he said, oh, there is a little beach coming. So I turned the airplane 90 degrees. And sure enough, there was a little gravel beach. I rammed the plane up the beach and stopped. just
Unbelievable.
Totally unbelievable. How come we were here? I couldn't believe it. So I throttled back, and since all the needles were in the red because we'd been flying at full power all the time, fully fine pitch, all the maximum everything. So the engine, I needed to let the engine cool off for a long time. And then that's when the little lady came over and said, have we arrived at the lodge yet? And I say, no, ma'am, but the weather is so bad, we're going to stop for a while and have a cup of coffee. And she said, oh, great, I wanted to stretch my leg. Well, I told her, lady, if you go and stretch your leg, don't go too far because the fog is so thick that even the seagulls are walking. And in the meantime, the passenger was staring at something in front of us. And I told him, what are you looking at? And he said, we're looking at the tent. I said, what tent? So I looked out, and sure enough, there were two tents. And I know those two tents. They're typical of a group of typically a PhD professor, a PhD students working on their thesis, and they cook. And there's, of the two tents, there's one tent where the two men sleep and where they have their gear, and there's a cookhouse where the cook stays, and with a long table where it's a get-together place. And people do research on anything. It could be rocks, it could be wildlife, it could be weather. Every 1,000 miles you get a group of people. I spent 2 weeks with a group like this, 1,000 miles further east, counting Ross geese. So how many geese come in from the Central Valley in California and nest there every summer. Same thing, PhD students, and then they cook. And so this is why I told the lady we're going to come in for a cup of coffee. Now, the airplane was still in the water, with the nose up on the beach, and the pontoons were covered with half an inch of ice, so they couldn't get back through the normal passenger door. So I brought everybody down through the cockpit, down the ladder, on the pontoon. I was hanging there and helping the passenger, and they slide down the pontoon and then jump the last 2 feet to the ground. And they all went to the cookhouse, where one guy was sticking his head out with a beard, and from the other tent, as expected, there were two other guys also with a beard sticking out because the weather was so bad that they stayed in camp all the time. So we moved in, and we were welcome. And the cook was delighted because he had visitors, so he could cook for all these people. So we spent 12 hours from about 6 o'clock in the evening to about 6 o'clock in the morning, when the weather finally cleared up and warmed up, and the ice had melted on the wings and on the airplane. And they had a wonderful time. So they told fishing stories, and I told them flying stories. And my main concern was trying to find out where on earth are we. So I had to try discuss geology because they turned out to be geologists and show some interest in geology so that they would pull out their own geology map and I could find out where we are. And so eventually, I was so enthused with geology that they pulled out their map, and because I was asking questions about the geology in the area, they did pull out their map. Well, I didn't listen to their story. I just wanted to know where our lake was. And it was on the side of it, there was a lot of marks around it. So I spotted the lake and I memorized the shape of the lake and tried to read some coordinates. And as soon as I knew that, then I rushed to the airplane to find it on my own chart. And I knew where we were. So the next day when the weather, and the passengers, they thought it was part of the trip. There's when you go on a tour in Thailand or in Nepal or someplace like that, usually a bus tour, they stop for lunch somewhere and you can buy some things and have a bite to eat. So they thought it was part of the program. It was a place where you could have coffee if needed. And so they ate. They drank all their coffee. They ate all their biscuits. The guy even cooked something for us, a soup or something like that, which they ate too. We emptied whatever they had. They had supplies for the rest of the summer. Between the 11 of us, we ate it all without any hesitation because they thought it was part of the package. And so I told them, don't worry, I'll come back and replenish your stock. So let them eat and I'll bring you some food back. And the next day we took off around 6 o'clock. And around 8 o'clock, we arrived at the lodge just for breakfast. They all came out and they had a shower and they had breakfast and then went out fishing on Great Bear Lake for the lake. And nobody knew any better. And in fact, they were so happy with the trip that at the end of the day, after their day of fishing locally on Great Bear Lake, they all, one at a time, invited me to their table and offered me a drink, saying, "No, that was a fabulous trip. It was long. It was really too long. It was 5 hours, but we really liked this to stop in the middle so that we could stretch our legs and have a coffee and relax." That was very well organized, and their fishing had been good, so they were thrilled. And they said, "I was a fabulous pilot, and the trip was fantastic, and they had the best day of their life."
One man's trip is another man's terror. Huh?
It was going to be the end, and it ended up being an outstanding trip. I'm glad you didn't say anything to him, right?
Yeah, and I never said anything to the management, to the lodge people or anyone. Nobody ever knew. But that was 50 years ago, so now I can talk about it.
Hey, statute of limitations is up. The book is out.
Dominique, your stories. Oh my gosh. I'm probably going to have nightmares about some of this stuff.
Horrifying, terrifying, amazing, incredible, flying to extremes. Thank you for writing the book, and thank you for spending this time with us. We are deeply grateful and thrilled to have a guest like you come on and share just a smidgen of what it's about, and you can get a lot more of this from the book Flying to Extremes. I can't recommend it enough. It is a wonderful read. Book. Yeah, absolutely. So
thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Glad, most glad. We are honored. So a couple other thank yous we probably ought to get out there. Fig, what do you think?
Yeah, we should probably thank our man Dave Hamilton.
Indeed. He is the owner, director, manager, chief cook, and bottle washer over at backbeatmedia.com. So he handles our advertising for us. So thank you to Dave Hamilton. He also gave us all the technical know-how to get this show off the ground and coming to you. So this show wouldn't exist were it not for Dave. So
we also needed to give our sponsors, HelloFresh and Flight Training International, a big thank you for supporting our show.
Indeed, that we couldn't keep doing these stories without our patrons and our sponsors. So we're deeply grateful for them. In fact, speaking of patrons, we've got a new one. I think we mentioned him in the preamble last week, but just to be sure, it's Kevin Sonny Byrne, new patron pilot. So you can join too at sotherewas.us/Patreon, and you will get exclusive extra stories if you join up there as a pilot, section lead, division lead, or tanker aircraft commander, as did Sal Marinello again. So thank you, Sal.
Thanks, Sal. Thanks, Byrne.
Yeah.
And hey, if you're inclined, leave us a 5-star rating. And if you can't leave us 5 stars, tell us why it's not, and we'll do better because we're trainable.
Absolutely. And if you insist on a 2-star rating or a 3-star rating or even a 4-star rating,
else.
Go to another show. Go give it to someone else. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
You can do that at sotherewas.us/rate.
We have a merch store. So there I was.us/merch. And, bikini season's winding down, but we have hoodies, long sleeve shirts, short sleeve shirts, beer steins, beer glasses, pint glasses, shot glasses, cocktail glasses.
Hats, blanket, you name it, even a clock. I'll tell you what, though, Vig, in the Southern Hemisphere, for those of our listeners down under, get yourself a bikini. Bikini season's coming.
Hey, that's right. Excellent point, sir. So, it's always bikini season somewhere, and it is down south, below the border, or below the equator. Okay.
Right? Yeah. And I think there's one or two other people we need to thank.
Well,
Uno, dos.
That's the Dos Gringos. We use their music for our intro, and they were our guests a long time ago. Excellent interviews, and their music is outstanding. 4 albums. There's not a bad song on any one of those albums.
No, indeed, they're not. So, and I almost forgot. Sticks, thank you for putting that up ever so briefly. There was Badass, bdsaviationphotography.com. Thank you for letting us use your images and those great gift packs that you sent us some time back. Love the coins, love the patches. Much appreciated.
Badass.
And to all of those who sign their name on the dotted line, thank you for your service. And thank you to your families who support you in your service. We couldn't have this amazing country we have without you. We're deeply grateful to you. So with that being said, no ejection seat handles, no collectives. Man, I don't know what to say. Don't let your pontoons fill up with water until next week.
Without your survival gear, for crying out loud.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh my gosh.
Don't go flying without your survival pack. All right, and don't forget the sleeping bag. There you go. Well played, Sticks.
Well played.
All right, there you go.
Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the shit I was wearing on that day. Now an F-16 is cramped enough, but it's even worse with all that stuff supposed to save your life. But we knew there was no way. 'Cause when you're going down the North Atlantic, man, it's over.
Or in the Arctic Ocean or a frozen lake, he said it's what?
He said it's over.
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
Oh! And we are out.